This is the MOJO, the Meaning of Life and Business podcast, where life and business intersect. Hosted by Jennifer Glass, CEO of Business Growth Strategies International and BGSI Coaching. We are dedicated to your success. Hello and welcome to another episode of MOJO, the Meaning of Life and Business. I'm really excited today because I get to geek out again on marketing. You all know how much I love geeking out on marketing. It is what I do, what I breathe, what I am involved with all the time. And one thing I just need to tell you listening is that even if you are not in the business of marketing, if you think you're not, I have a really big thing that you need to hear. Yes, you are. You're a dentist? Okay. You're in the business of marketing dentistry. You're in telecom? You're in the business of marketing telecom. Customers are not going to know you if you are not marketing. So yes, you are a marketer. And so it's really important for you to be hearing all of these different things that we talk about when it comes to marketing. And I have an incredible guest on the show today who's going to help us learn a little bit more about marketing. Before I bring him on, though, let me tell you a little bit about him. Terry Feinberg has started 2 successful marketing agencies. He's been a newspaper publisher and has led a nonprofit trade association. Terry, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jennifer. Happy to be here.
Thank you. So, Terry, let me ask you, first of all, I'm curious about the newspaper side because that is something from ages ago. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Sure. It was an interesting opportunity. For the 6 years prior to that, I had been commuting from the San Francisco Bay Area to the Phoenix area every week and really needed to come home and was looking for an opportunity. It was a Gannett-owned paper in Salinas, California, so a fairly small community. This was 2008. I think population was about 150,000, and the circulation was at that time a little over 20,000. That was still before the steep decline in papers. And Gannett was trying to figure out the future of newspapers and made an experiment to bring in somebody who had business and marketing and advertising experience, but no publishing experience to see if that changed, what would happen with that changed perspective. But the newspaper business continued to decline rather precipitously after that.
Absolutely. Like you said, just the decline. People aren't reading newspapers the same way like they used to. A lot of the information that we get online now replaces the need for newspapers. And so we definitely are in that position. And I can tell you that I personally put a publication out of business that my university used to be sending out because I was sending the information out by email when I worked at the university. And at the end of the quarter, there was nothing left for them to be putting in this print thing. And so they're like, all right, I guess you killed it. They weren't happy about that. Different story.
Yeah, I mean, we could spend our whole time talking about publishing and newspapers, but I think, across the board, the industry was, well, one, they were fat, dumb, and happy and ignorant and arrogant, but they also didn't see the real threat that, I mean, even initially more so than sources of information, it was sources of marketing and advertising. And, newspapers really, their bread and butter was classified advertising, and Craigslist came along and really single-handedly destroyed the industry. And the industry just was too slow to see it as a threat and too slow to react.
Right. Thank you. So that brings me then to an interesting place when we're marketing our business, right? Because one of the things in marketing is we have to know when we have to pivot, right? Pivot is so key because we can be going down a particular campaign and we can say, I'm going. And then sometimes I go way past the point of no return. And the point of diminishing returns was like 3 miles back that way. and we don't even realize exactly where we are anymore in terms of that. And sometimes we understand exactly when we have to pivot. In the marketing world, and you've run two agencies and you've run the newspaper business like we spoke about, in addition to the nonprofit areas that you've worked with as well, tell us a little bit more in terms of pivoting when you're in midst of a campaign. How do you start needing, first of all, obviously you research the campaign, you understand your audience, things along those lines, but walk us through, please, how do we start understanding where we may need to start looking to pivot?
Well, let me take two tracks on that. Let me first add to your introduction that whether or not people think they're marketing, that they are marketing. And I would extend that to branding because the activities are going on. Are you being intentional? Are you being strategic? Or are things just happening? How are customers finding you? What do they think about you? All of that is happening by day-to-day activities and interactions, whether or not you are intentionally trying to put a message out there, the messages are still getting out there. So in terms of pivoting, I think the most important things are one, really understanding and being on top of your audience, on top of your market. What are they thinking? What do they need? What are they wanting? I think too many companies market from their perspective, not from a customer perspective. But there also is the issue of measuring and monitoring the activity and the results. I think historically in advertising, advertisers always get bored or tired or wanting to change their messaging while it's still being very effective and maybe even being more effective because of the multiplying factor of reach and frequency. So, I mean, to give you an example, I've got a digital ad campaign going for a client right now. It's a rotating series of ads. The first month, our click-through rate was, I think it was 0.28. Same creative in the campaign and really same strategy. The fifth month, it was 0.85. So, by monitoring the results, we can see that it's not only is it continuing to work, it's becoming more and more effective. And if that started to drop down, that would be a good indication of maybe whether it's a total pivot or just a change in strategy or change in creativity would be in order.
Absolutely. And it's so important, like you said, just to understand when you're going down certain channels and looking at these numbers to really be understanding where things are going to be changing or whatever in terms of that. So I want to go a little bit deeper, though, into the customer research, right? Understanding who our avatar is, understanding how we can get a better handle on who they are, what they're looking for, what their needs are. When you're looking at creating a campaign, how would you start identifying that ideal avatar or that ideal customer profile so we can go from there? And how do you then start really researching even more to get a little bit deeper?
Couple thoughts on research. First, I think it's important to, as vitally important as some research is, it's important to recognize that any research you do is just going to aid and inform decisions you make. The research isn't definitive. It's not automatic. It's not gonna make things happen. It gives you confidence in the decisions that are made, and with that in mind, how much effort and how much cost goes into the research really needs to be weighed against the the potential risk, the potential reward, and the cost of the product. If a auto manufacturer is looking to produce a new model and it's going to take 10 years of R&D and hundreds of $1 million of factory tooling, it's worth some significant investment in research to really understand how consumers are going to respond to everything from the shape of the steering wheel to the name on the mark. If a heating and air conditioning, local heating and air conditioning company is trying to decide what their fall maintenance, a message for their fall maintenance program would be, the research may be just test a couple of different messages and see what people respond to best. But I think underlying that to any business is the need for some basic, what in research terms would be qualitative research to really understand what your customers and potential customers think, why they do business with you, what they struggle with, what challenges they have in their business, and figuring how you can fit in there and help. And oftentimes, whether it's hiring somebody else outside to do it or doing it internally, you can get an incredible amount of information doing, a dozen and a half short interviews with people, not focused on selling them, but really focused on trying to glean information that can then help you, both position the company, position the products with your pricing, with your service delivery, with everything.
Absolutely. And like you said, it's so important, especially if it is going to be something that you're looking at potentially having significant opportunities from, to invest in really understanding who your customer avatar is. And so it's really important then that we go that route. So let's move along then the process of a marketer. So we understand now who our customer is a little bit more because we did that research, whether we spoke with you, Terry, to do it, we did it on our own. However, we're looking at that. Now we understand a little bit more who our avatar is that we're needing to speak to. How do we then start creating the creative? Whether it's the copy, the art that goes around it, how do we start putting that together in a way that's going to then get us to a point where we can say, all right, we're here, we got it?
In the agency world, we often start with, or almost always start with, a creative brief. And I mean, I think even a business that is doing their own marketing, whether or not they create a formal brief or not, going through the thought process is really important to help provide the direction. And that includes, some upfront strategy. First and foremost, what are we trying to accomplish? Is it direct sales? Is it lead generation? Is it brand awareness? What is the goal? What are we trying to accomplish? It helps to add in that how you're going to measure it, because then you can come back and see whether or not it's effective. But then looking at, the audience comes into play in this, what's important to them, who they are, where they're consuming their messaging and their media, demographics of, age groups, income level, education level, how best to communicate to them and where best to communicate to them. And all of this is drilling down and developing, a kind of a strategic roadmap of what you're trying to communicate. If you know what you're trying to communicate and to whom, and you add onto that, information such as brand image and tone, are you cutting edge? Are you traditional and secure? Putting all those factors into it, that really helps then direct the creative development. If you know what's important to them, how they like to communicate, how you're trying to position the company, that all of that goes into the creative stew pot of trying to create the campaign. And I would add to that also, really taking a deep look at the competition and where can you differentiate yourself and slot in and maybe zig when they're zagging or zag when they're zigging, but how can you stand out with the creative application of this message that you decided is the right one to go with, or frequently series of messages. You take, again, an advertising term of A/B testing, which is oftentimes ABCD, where you've got the basic approach, but you're testing 3 different headlines or even 3 different color combinations or packaging design or whatever it is to see, we've got our basic direction, but now let's really zero in and get real world performance results and see what is going to resonate best with our audience.
Thank you. So I wanted to ask you, because you mentioned just now the packaging. Is the packaging the branding that we're doing, or is the branding separate and apart and it's a much bigger concept?
Yes to all of that. And it depends to a great level on what you're selling and how your customers are going to do business with you. I've done quite a bit of food marketing, and except for a limited number of well-established brands, the package determines the sale. It is the presentation, it is the sales message. As somebody's walking down the aisle and they don't have a preference for pasta, they just know they want to buy a box of spaghetti. It's the packaging that's going to make the sale on that. In some industries, cosmetics being the first one that comes to mind, packaging is everything. If you look at cost of goods, packaging may represent 90% of a perfume bottle, but that enables them to build that aura around it and that image and sell something that maybe costs them 50 cents in materials for $195. Often true in alcohol and adult beverages as well, that packaging really is the most important especially for consumer products. Packaging is absolutely critical to make the sale and deliver the message, but it is also part of the brand. And take just a second to explore branding, because back to what I said earlier, companies are branding whether they're trying to or not. And branding is really the images, the perceptions, the feelings, the attitudes that not just your customers, prospects, that the world has towards your company and your products. And the logo and packaging is a visual representation of that. And if you're trying to market a new beverage product to Gen Z people, they're going to respond to different packaging than a baby boomer will. And so, brighter colors, more of a phonetic look to the package is going to maybe work better with one demographic, where something that looks more secure, traditional, timeless will work with a different audience. So for consumer products in particular, packaging is absolutely critical, but it also can go too far. If you're trying to sell bargain basement, or if you're trying to sell low cost alternative, if the packaging looks too rich, there's a disconnect between the visual image of the package and the brand message that, we're basic and cheap, but good.
So let me actually ask you a question on that. And I'm thinking specifically about the e-commerce world. So there are those Chinese retailers, let's just put it that way, that we know of, that they're selling everything. I mean, you see all this stuff that they advertise on TV, and they're selling knockoff versions of it on these platforms, possibly made by the exact same factory. It's just they're not slapping this brand on it, they're slapping on some other name and calling it a day. If you're talking about the branding of what's being sold, right? And a lot of times the product, like you said, the price is dependent on the amount of advertising you're spending in the branding, right? There's a reason why there's certain retailers who are much cheaper. Think about the grocery side. Here in the United States, and I don't know if they're out in California, but at least here on the East Coast, you have discount grocers like Aldi and Lidl. And then you've got the other major grocers, the Whole Foods and the Publix, the Ralphs, the ShopRites or Stop and Shop, whatever it may be, that are very different in terms of what we are dealing with. So when we're looking at branding and you're saying does it connect in terms of the price point and the way that it looks? Does that have a disconnect if it's in one of these discount grocers or online retailers, the same way like it would if you have two products in the same store side by side? One is cheap, one is not.
I'll take it even a step further than that. If you're looking from the seller, the manufacturer, I'm going to give you an example in agriculture. So the grower, oftentimes, take a food product, and I'll make it fresh produce that they're selling to the high-end grocery store, and they're selling to the discounter. And if they use the same packaging in both, the high-end store, which probably represents higher margins and more stable business, is going to be upset if their competitor across the street is selling the same product for two-thirds of the price. So oftentimes you'll see companies, again, talking produce, a product will come out of the same field. It is an identical mango or whatever it is, but it is branded as two entirely separate products, and one brand is sold to Publix and the other is sold to Walmart, so that the pricing and the brand image, part of which is reflected in the packaging, is differentiated. Taking it even beyond different types of stores, I trying to think when generics started, but probably back in the 80s or 90s when supermarkets started with their own brands and started with generics, which again are oftentimes produced on the same lines as the regular products, but they're private label branded, and that generic packaging always is more basic looking than the national brand is. So you expect to pay a little bit more if you're buying the Procter and Gamble product than if you're buying the Aldi home store product. So yeah, the image, the brand image of the packaging should match the people you're trying to sell to, the people who are selling it to them, so that the end consumers, the retailers you're selling to, and the quality and pricing that you're trying to get across.
Thank you. And so I want you who's listening to this conversation, I want you to go back to that for a second because it's really important, right? If you think about it for a second, if you're selling something, you might be selling it in two very distinct places. If you're an online business and you're a service provider, say a business coach, You may have something that you are selling, and you may have something that you're literally giving away for free in exchange for an email address. Both can be validly in play at the same time. Difference would be, as an example, and I do this with some of my products, I will give a certain piece of my overall program for free in exchange for an email address. Other people can come in and they can buy the whole program. Other people may find that this one piece, instead of it just being free, is a $7 item. It all depends on where it is, where it's being put out there to the public, and the connection that's there. And that is exactly what Terry was just saying in terms of that need to understand, how is it going to be seen? How is it going to be, from the consumer perspective, how is that going to be making a difference? Am I right in that understanding, Terry?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd even add another twist to that. And this comes back to really, understanding your audience and looking at consultants and service providers. Being one and being a solopreneur, I'm not only selling services, I'm buying services. And because I'm in the marketing and advertising business, I pay more attention to all of the ads and spam and everything I get, because I'm trying to see what other people are doing and learn from it. And I've received solicitations from several people, touting whatever it is they want to offer to my small business. And you go to their website, and all of the examples listed are with Fortune 100 companies. So my perception is, if you're selling bookkeeping services to Apple Computer and General Motors, you're going to be too expensive for me. And I'm not even going to follow up with you, even though you invested marketing dollars in trying to find me and reach me and send me a message about how you can help with my small business bookkeeping. But, as soon as I look at your website, it's like I've already made the decision that you're not for me because of what you're presenting there. And I think, this will be a little bit of a tangent, but websites, have been critical for probably the past decade or more, but particularly for service providers, the way I look at it, the website is probably not going to generate many leads, and it's certainly not going to make any sales, but it will certainly lose you a lot of sales. Not having one, because people will go to their website and check you out before following through to actually contact you. So it's really a credibility builder. So, what's that first impression you want people to have about your business? Is that, I don't even have a website, but, I'm this great consultant, come do business with me. Or, I work with small and medium-sized businesses, but every example on my website is some major corporation. If there's a disconnect between me as a buyer of your business service and what you're presenting on your website, I'm not going to take the next step and contact you to get more information.
Absolutely. Thank you. So we understand a little bit more, like we said, about how to take the next step, how to be paying more, more attention in terms of what's going on that's out there and everything. So let me ask you, just in terms of reaching the consumer next, right? Because you mentioned the website, you mentioned emails, the direct mails, things along those lines. And I know that you also say that direct mail and even spam email works. And like you said, you pay attention to the stuff that you get just to see what someone else is doing. But would you recommend that a small business does a direct mail campaign and email campaign, even if it is one of those spammier ones, just to be getting information out there?
I think it depends on the situation, but they can be very effective marketing tools. And, I think people need to look at what they're selling and not only the value of a sale, but the lifetime value of a new customer. If you're selling a one-time use thing and every sale is to a new customer, that's, a different approach than if you have a source of recurring income. And if you've got a source of recurring income from that customer, it may be worth losing money on the first sale, because by the third or fourth sale, you're gonna make it up to them. And yeah, that works in both a business to business and a business consumer standpoint. But prior to the digital world coming along, direct mail was the best way to target, because you could really zero in on any number of demographic factors that today seem so basic and primitive compared to what we can do with behavioral targeting on digital advertising. But still, you could, within whatever it is you're looking for, whether, by income or location or whatever you're trying to do, you can really dial in and just contact those people. And direct mail was always extremely cost effective, despite the fact that everybody hated junk mail. When something came that caught their attention, and I've always been a strong proponent of direct mail postcards, because the message could be read between the stack and the trash can. But there are all sorts of different strategies and approaches to direct mail, but still very cost effective because it's very targetable and very measurable. In direct mail, you can come up with an offer and come up with three different offers and test those three offers, and based on the response you get, know where it's coming from. And the digital version of that through spam emails is, and I use spam because that's what we all call it, but it's still exceedingly targetable, exceedingly measurable, and exceedingly cost effective if you've identified the right message to the right people. And it's, I, using email as a contact is one of the most cost effective things you can do, even if your response rate is in the fractions of 1%, because it's so cheap to deliver so many messages.
Absolutely. Thank you. And so again, just think about what it is that your lifetime value is of your client. And again, this goes back to understanding your avatar. Because if you understand your avatar and you understand what their typical buying process is going to be like, you are going to have a much clearer idea of how much you can really be investing to get the client. One of my mentors, and Terry, I'm sure you know him too, good friend Dan Kennedy, he says, he who can spend the most to get a customer wins. It really is important. Think about what that means, but it's not spending. That's the thing I don't like, that Dan uses the word spending. It's he who can invest the most to get the client is going to win. Because spending, I look at, I'm going out to Starbucks or whatever, and I'm buying something that I can make at home. If I'm investing in a client, that is an entirely different thing. And I don't mean to be putting Starbucks down by any stretch of the imagination. They're a great coffee shop, and I love a lot of their stuff that they have too. It's just a matter of understanding what it is that we're doing and how we look at the difference between spend and invest in terms of what we're doing. So,
And I mean, if I can, I would add a twist to, I would definitely say, just the amount of money is not a good measurement. I would look at smart investing as being the measurement, that, you're strategic in what you're doing and where you're doing it. And, regardless, you've got the best message, the right audience, you've used the media, you know how to hit them, you're getting a good response. And if you can triple that by doing that 3 times more, then you're smart investing and you're getting results and it's making sense. If you're just throwing, a bunch of money at the wall and seeing what sticks, that's not necessarily the smartest way to do it.
Absolutely. Thank you. So let me ask you, just in terms of moving on, people have been listening to our conversation for the last 30 some odd minutes, and they're interested in connecting with you. How did they reach out to you and connect?
Yeah, I am available on LinkedIn. My website is terryfeinbergconsulting.com, TerryFeinberg, or LinkedIn. I'm not sure if you'll put up a graphic at the end with my contact information, but I'm always happy to talk to people, even more so since I've been a solopreneur for the last 8 or 9 years now. It's always fun to have a conversation with somebody new. So always happy to talk to people and, give them my thoughts. And if I can help, great. If not, that's great too.
Thank you so much, Terry. And yes, we'll have all of your information in the description or show notes for the episode. And you can definitely be connecting with Terry, get more information, get into Terry's universe. And if it's appropriate, have a conversation, see what Terry might be able to help you with. Again, Terry mentioned those research your customers. That's one of the services that Terry does, and a great way for you to really have a better understanding with Terry's interviews and everything else that he really does. And again, that's something that you'll be able to find out more about when you do speak with Terry. So again, think about what it means to really be a marketer, what it means to be getting those opportunities to help your clients get the results that they're looking for. Ultimately, at the end of the day, all of us are in business because we want to do something to help people. We hopefully are not just in it for the money. It is, how are we helping others through whatever it is that we provide? If I'm an electrician, I'm a plumber, I'm a dentist, I'm a pediatrician. I mean, it really doesn't matter. At the end of the day, we are trying to help others. That is the idea. And so whatever it is, that is where marketing can then help you get the message out there and really connect with even more people. Terry, thank you so much for being my guest on the show today.
Been great. Thank you.
Thank you. And on that note, this has been another episode of MOJO, the meaning of life and business. And until next time, here is to your success. This has been another episode of MOJO, the meaning of life and business podcast. If you like what you heard, please consider leaving us a review, liking us, or reaching out to us. You can contact us at bgsicoaching.com and let us know what you think. Thanks so much again for listening.